movie opens on an elderly man resting in his room, with no idea that someone has already slipped into the house. The intruder moves without a sound, and before the old man can react, it is over. Then the killer takes his time. He straightens the room, puts every object back in place, and leaves the house looking so ordinary that nobody would think to ask a question about it. The story then moves to an old man named Deok-su, the owner of a small rental building. His reputation around the neighborhood is terrible. He is loud, blunt, quick to scold anyone who crosses him, and he does not care who is listening. That morning starts the way most of his mornings do, with a round of visits to every tenant behind on rent. One of the doors he knocks on belongs to a longtime tenant named Choi, an elderly man who is unwell and looked after daily by a pair of social workers. Deok-su can see the condition he is in and still demands the overdue rent right now. The social workers are visibly disgusted, but he ignores them and reminds Choi he will be back to collect. On his way through the neighborhood, he notices a crowd on a bridge where the body of an elderly person has just been found. While the police work the scene, Deok-su spots one of his tenants, a young woman named Ji-yoon. He says nothing about the body and simply reminds her that her rent is overdue. Deok-su does not know it yet, but he is about to get involved. This is the chase dine. Deok-su also works as a locksmith, and that day a customer asks him to cut a duplicate key. Afterward, he stops at a small bakery run by a middle-aged woman named Yong-seo, who he has quietly carried a soft spot for over the years. Not long after, Officer Lee asks for his help opening a door locked from the inside. It turns out to be the home of the man killed in the opening scene, and his body is finally being carried out. Something about it leaves Deok-su uneasy about Choi. That night he goes to Choi's house. The door is already broken and hanging open, but nobody is inside. A moment later, Choi walks up with a few bottles of soju and explains that he is making dinner for an old friend who is coming to visit. In the middle of their conversation, Choi reveals that he used to be a detective. The talk turns to the two recent deaths, and Choi says they remind him of a string of unsolved killings from 30 years ago. Both victims were elderly people who went to the church for the free meals served every Wednesday and Thursday, and neither had been seen since last Thursday. That is why Choi believes they were killed on a Wednesday night. Deok-su does not buy a word of it. To him, it is guesswork with nothing behind it. At the same time, Ji-eun walks back to her room alone, with no idea that someone has been watching her the entire way. A few steps inside, a pair of hands grabs her from behind. Luckily, it is her own friend, who has been secretly staying in the room without Deok-su knowing. Deok-su says goodnight and promises to come back in the morning to fix Choi's broken door handle. But that same night, Choi wakes up to a cold draft coming from a door that should have been shut. When he gets up to check it, a figure steps out of the dark and attacks him. The next morning, Deok-su arrives to keep his promise and finds Choi dead with a cord tied around his neck. The social workers show up soon after, and in front of the officers, one of them mentions that only a day earlier, Deok-su had been pressuring Choi over unpaid rent. That is all it takes for suspicion to land on him. Word travels fast, and plenty of people decide he is the reason the old man is dead. The next day, Ji-yoon comes to see him at work and tells him she is moving out because she cannot keep up with the rent. Before she goes, she points out that for all his shouting, he has never once actually thrown anyone out. Underneath the rough edges, there is a kindness nobody has ever noticed. After she leaves, Deok-su lets himself back into Choi's house and finds a photograph. While he is studying it, someone shoves him hard from behind and demands to know where Choi is. Deok-su explains what happened, but the man does not believe him. He searches the house and finds a plane ticket to America, sent by Choi's child so his father could finally live with him after more than 20 years apart. For the man, that settles it. Nobody preparing to see his family again would end his own life, which means Choi's death was a murder staged as a suicide. That night, when Ji-yoon heads home after work, someone follows her again. Back in her room, she sees her friend sitting in front of the toilet and assumes she has passed out drunk. But when she tries to wake her, she realizes her friend is dead. Before she can call for help, the mysterious figure appears and attacks her. Around the same time, Deok-su hears a commotion from room 205. Something about the sound pulls his mind back to Choi's story about the killings 30 years ago. Just as he reaches for the door, another resident catches him standing there and accuses him of peeping. The next morning, Deok-su is eating at Yong-seo's bakery when he runs into the man from Choi's house again. This time, the man introduces himself as Park, Choi's old partner from his years as a detective. Hearing that, Deok-su remembers the noise from Ji-eun's room. The two of them head straight there, and Park searches the place corner by corner. When he opens the refrigerator, they find the severed head and butchered remains of Ji-eun's friend. Strangely, though, there is no sign of Ji-eun anywhere. Deok-su wants to call the police, but Park stops him. The way he sees it, if Ji-eun is still alive, involving the police could panic whoever has her and put her in more danger. Deok-su goes home to wash the blood off his clothes, and that is where Park asks him to work together and find the killer before it is too late. The first lead takes them to an old truck Choi left behind. Inside are stacks of investigation files Choi had been collecting for years. He never really stopped hunting the killer from 3 decades ago. The case itself was shut down out of nowhere because Korea was about to host the Olympics. Park then reminds him that one victim survived 30 years ago, and that woman was Yong-seo, the owner of the bakery Deok-su visits so often. The trauma left her unable to remember the man's face, so the police never got a description. Park also tells him about a night when a detective named Kim came face-to-face with the suspect on patrol. The man deliberately drew Kim out of his car and killed him, but he was wearing a raincoat and a mask, so his face was never seen. After that night, the killer vanished, and no similar murderers followed until now. Park then hands over Choi's notes, which reveal something uncomfortable. Deok-su himself had once been a suspect because he could cut keys and let himself into the victims' homes. Working from the notes, the two start visiting every old suspect one by one. Later, at Yong-seo's bakery, Park mentions that Choi had chased the same lead to the train station several times. Then his attention locks onto a doctor named Jung-seok nearby. Park studies his face like he is trying to place him, and soon they start following him as he gives free medical consultations. As it turns out, Jung-seok only moved to the area about 6 months ago as a volunteer, and not long after he arrived, the brutal killing started up again. It could be a coincidence, but for Park it is far too big to ignore, and he seems convinced this is the killer he has been chasing all along. Park keeps pushing to search the house, while Deok-su keeps asking for a reason that actually makes sense, since all of this rests on assumption. But something in the way Jung-seok looked at them reminded Park of the man who killed Kim. According to his theory, Ji-eun is being held somewhere inside that house. As luck would have it, Jung-seok is seen leaving home, so Deok-su slips inside while Park follows the doctor. Once he is in, Deok-su thinks he hears Ji-eun faintly calling for help. He searches everywhere and finds nobody until he reaches a room sealed behind a locked steel door. Certain there is something big behind it, he starts prying at it with a wrench. At that exact moment, Park loses track of Jung-seok and his calls to Deok-su go unanswered. On top of that, a group of thugs he had beaten up before shows up looking for payback. Park handles them easily, but as he walks away, one of them quietly slides a knife into his stomach. Meanwhile, Jung-seok comes home and catches Deok-su forcing the steel door open, calmly warning him to stop and get out. In the middle of the standoff, Park makes it to the house and, wounded as he is, raises a pistol at the doctor. Jung-seok gives up, but he keeps begging them not to open the room. That desperation only makes them more suspicious, so they force the door anyway. And inside there is no Ji-eun at all, only a garden full of flowers. Jung-seok explains that the flowers are used to make opium. He admits he grows them to prepare medicine for his paralyzed wife, and he begs them not to report it. Park looks completely crushed. For so long he was certain this man was the killer he had spent decades chasing, and now that certainty collapses in front of him. With his emotions coming apart, Park points the gun and orders Jung-seok to put on a mask so he can be sure this is the serial killer from 30 years ago. He is ready to pull the trigger. And then it comes out that the pistol in his hand is only a toy. Park starts calling Deok-su by Choi's name and orders him to arrest the doctor. Only when Deok-su notices the identification tag around Park's neck does everything make sense. Park is a dementia patient who walked out of a care facility, and he keeps mixing what is real with what is not. A medical team soon arrives to take him back. Deok-su apologizes to Jung-seok and promises never to tell anyone about the poppies. Back at home, Ji-eun's disappearance keeps gnawing at him. Then he remembers Choi mentioning an elderly man who had also gone missing over the past few days, and he heads straight for that man's house. At the same time, Officer Lee has started looking into the same case after the church reported that one of its elderly regulars had stopped showing up for the free meals. When Deok-su arrives, his instinct turns out to be right. The old man named Han is dead, hanging from the ceiling of his own home. On the floor, Deok-su spots a key in a torn scrap of fabric. Looking closer, he remembers something. The pattern is an exact match for the trousers of the customer who asked him to cut a duplicate house key just days earlier. Right about then, Officer Lee reaches the house, finds the body, and catches sight of Deok-su leaving on a motorbike. Deok-su rides to that customer's house, and when he tries the key he picked up at the scene, the door opens. Sure enough, the place is filled with photographs of the murdered elderly victims. Before he can dig deeper, Officer Lee walks in, having followed him the whole way. Convinced that Deok-su is the killer, Lee handcuffs him on the spot, and Deok-su argues his case and tells him to open the drawer full of photographs. Lee tells him to wait in the car while he searches the place for Deok-su, the customer in question. But Deok-su circles around the side of the house instead and finds Deok-su first. He demands to know where Ji-eun is, and Deok-su immediately attacks him.
뭡니까?
기운이 어디 있어?
웃기지 마!
Luckily, Lee arrives in time and orders the man to surrender. Instead, Deok-su goes after Lee too and tries to run. Lee lands a blow on his leg, leaving him with a heavy limp. Deok-su chases after him. As Deok-su tries to climb over a barrier, a speeding car slams into him and throws his body across the road. Dying, he swears he was never involved with Ji-eun and has no idea where she is. He explains that he saw her after killing Choi and followed her home days later, but when he was ready to make his move, somebody else was already inside her room, so he backed off. Then his injuries take him and he dies. With the man behind the elderly killings dead, the police treat the case as closed, but Ji-eun is still missing. And somewhere else entirely, she lies helpless with her wrists and ankles bound, while a mysterious man injects another dose into her IV line. The next day, Deok-su tries to convince the police that the real killer is still out there. Nobody believes him, so he decides to keep investigating on his own. He goes back to Yong-seo, the one person who survived the tragedy 30 years ago, hoping something is still buried in her memory. Most of it has faded because of the trauma, but she does remember two details. The man had an overpowering smell, and he had an extra finger on one of his hands. After that, Deok-su heads to the facility where Park is being treated, hoping the old detective can still help. Sadly, Park is not stable enough to hold a conversation, but just as Deok-su is about to leave the room, his eyes land on a flower arrangement, and at that exact moment, Park says that Young-sok is the one. Instantly, Deok-su remembers the hidden flower garden in the doctor's house. Maybe he had missed something all along. He returns to the doctor's home pretending to be a patient, and during the checkup, he keeps watching Young-suk's hands. Then he mentions the scar on the doctor's hand and says the killer they are looking for still has not been found. That is all it takes. Young-suk realizes his secret is exposed. He attacks Deok-su and drags his unconscious body into a hidden room inside the house. And that is where the whole mystery finally unravels. It also becomes clear that Deok-su had come to think of Ji-eun as something close to his own daughter. Before Deok-su can do anything, Young-suk comes back and lays out the reasons behind everything he has done. He says he grew sick of his constantly ill wife and could not stand caring for her any longer. He wants Ji-eun to take her place, and he intends to cut the nerves in her body so she will never walk or speak again. That way, she would be completely obedient and completely dependent on him for the rest of her life, exactly like the wife who now sits in a wheelchair. Young-seok also reveals that the man who died under the car was nothing more than a copycat, imitating the murders Young-seok himself committed 30 years ago. And afraid of being exposed by him, he had been searching for a chance to get rid of the man, and that chance arrived at the perfect moment. Every crime would be blamed on the copycat while he stayed clear of suspicion. Just as Young-suk is preparing to operate on Ji-eun, the door swings open and Park appears again, with a gun aimed straight at him. This time the weapon is not a toy, and he fires without hesitating. He cuts Deok-su loose, and Deok-su lifts Ji-eun and carries her out of the room while Park stays behind to face Young-seok alone. The two men grapple, but Young-suk gets the better of him, and then he turns the gun on his own wife. Still on his feet, Young-seok goes after Deok-su and Ji-eun. Their escape ends at a construction site not far from the house. With nowhere left to run, Deok-su stands and fights. But Young-seok has the gun, and Deok-su loses the struggle. Just as the doctor's about to shoot him, Park arrives and throws himself into the fight all over again. In the end, working together, the two of them finally bring Young-seok down. Sometime later, Deok-su is in a hospital bed recovering, with Ji-eun and Young-seo there to visit him. What used to be a relationship built on misunderstanding has turned into something far warmer. And for the first time, Deok-su does not look like a man who is alone. And that is where the story ends. So the moral of the story is, never underestimate the grumpy landlord. He might complain about your rent today and save you from a serial killer tomorrow.